Jeff forgets that when we come up here, we have to talk about 25 years of worth of good base science out there, not just the past year. I want to recognize two of my colleagues from the scientific community, Bill Dennison, Vice President of Science Applications for the University of Maryland, Beth McGee from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, their senior scientist as well out there. So, looking at the past year, although we did see some improvements, and we'll discuss them as well, overall that bay ecosystem is still in pretty poor condition out there. We did see an improvement, about 6% on our the index that we described here, about 45%. But remember, that's on a scale of from 0 to 100%. 100% being a restored Chesapeake Bay right now. So we still have a long ways to go. What the key message here as well is our science is indicating what the health of the bay is out there. We use 11 different indicators, some water quality indicators, some looking at habitat and what fish eat out there, and then the fish and shellfish themselves. We can combine them in two indicators up here, water quality and looking at the habitat and fish food, and then Frank's going to describe the fish and shellfish themselves. They're the ones that describe how well the bay ecosystem is doing. It's tidal creeks, it's rivers, the system itself out there. We're fortunate to have a tremendous amount of good science from universities like University of Maryland, Virginia Marine Science, Penn State, across the 6-state watershed as well out there. So these are our measures of how the bay is doing with the 17 million people within the watershed itself and growing. But let's look at some highlights. As we did see some slight improvements out there. We saw, in the case of water clarity, we saw improvements in the clarity of the waters out there. That's critical. Without clear waters, we're not going to see underwater grasses. Without underwater grasses, we're not going to have sustained harvest of blue crabs. We're not going to have places for baby rockfish, etc. to hide in. We're not going to have waterfowl to the levels we've seen historically out there as well. Another key indicator, that being underwater grasses. We saw the second highest measure of underwater grasses since our colleagues at the Virginia Marine Science started making the survey out there. So we were up at over almost 86,000 acres of grasses around the Chesapeake Bay watershed itself. One of those key canaries out there in terms of how well this particular system is responding. That was an improvement over last year as well. And the last piece was, we actually have to go down to the bottom of the bay. Part of one of the measures that scientists look at is worms and clams on the bottom. Somebody say, well, why would you look there? These are guys down there, if you're a crab, if you're a spot or a croaker, that's the next dinner that you're looking at there. That we also saw improvements down there. As that bottom of the bay comes more healthy, more food, it also has another indication that things are moving forward. But each one of these indicators saw a slight improvement. Again, still overall, we're seeing the bay itself, the ecosystem, is not healthy to the level that we'd like to see it. One of our more important indicators that we humans think about as well, and that's dissolved oxygen in our case, or dissolved oxygen in the case of the fish and shellfish out there as well. That only 12% of the entire Chesapeake Bay waters met Maryland, Virginia, DC, and Delaware's clean water standards out there. That means that over those last 3 years, we look at it as 3 years, not just over the past year, only 12% of the Chesapeake Bay had sufficient oxygen, whether you're a rockfish, a shad, an oyster, a clam, or a lowly worm along the bottom of the bay itself. Clearly, if you don't have oxygen, we don't have a healthy system out there as well. That measure is also important because it doesn't just look at what happened last summer. It also looks at the last several years. So that oftentimes we look out the door, we see, oh, the bay looks in good shape, or it looks bad this year, and we wait for the next year to come as well. We've got to continue to look at multiple years worth of data and information. We've been keeping an eye on the bay's health for 25 years now. We've got to continue to do so. We've got to continue to measure it over those as well. There's two pieces to this story as well. There's the good news, and that is the bay is very responsive. That if you have some years with low runoff coming from our agricultural fields, from our neighbor's backyard, even your backyard itself, then the bay does respond. It responds very rapidly. We saw that in underwater grasses. We saw it in other cases as well. So the bay, in this case, has a short-term memory. It will respond quickly. The bad news is the bay is very responsive, that it responds to that runoff very quickly. And in fact, looks like good news this year. Remember those snow melts, that's not too distant of a memory. That system may come down again there as well. So that's the problem, is that it responds very rapidly to weather conditions, to runoff. That is clearly a signal that this system's not healthy. A healthy system would be a lot more resilient. It would respond, it would hold back some of those nutrients, keep them up on that farm field, keep them on that riparian forest buffer, on that lawn that didn't happen to be fertilized this year. That water went down and percolated as opposed to running off and taking fertilizer into the local streams and rivers. So that given that, And you look at some of the charts that we have on here, and I think on page 4, and that would be, some people would look at the nitrogen and phosphorus levels and say, that's good news. Over that long term, I think our scientists measured around 240 millions of pounds of nitrogen coming in the system last year. And we're talking about a Bay pollution diet, somewhere around 190 to 200, and somebody would say, hey, you're starting to approach the levels that you need to go. Now, next year, if we had a large runoff event, we may see those loads go up there as well. We have got to figure out how to build, as I said, that resilience back in the system, how to keep the rainwater on that green roof in Washington, D.C., how to keep it infiltrated in that cornfield up in Pennsylvania, how to keep it in on that neighbor's backyard down in Norfolk, Virginia as well. We cannot sustain a healthy Chesapeake Bay until we build back into her the ability to withstand these different loads and conditions out there as well. So until we reduce that nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment pollution out there, and until we build that resilience back in there, until we get to the point where the bay's natural metabolism can actually start taking and withstand these dry years and the runoff years that we've seen in the past, we're not going to see a healthy Chesapeake Bay. But again, the good news is the bay is responsive to good low levels of nutrients coming in there. The bad news still is it's still very dependent and very reactive to the weather conditions that occur out there.